communities will flourish, our people will be prosperous, our traditions will be cherished, our faith will be strong, and our future will be brighter than ever before. I go from this majestic place with a loyal and joyful heart, an optimistic spirit, and a supreme confidence that for our country and for our children, the best is yet to come. Thank you and farewell. God bless you. God bless the United States of America.
Donald Trump speaking there in a video message released just in the last hour or so. And US President-elect Joe Biden has held an emotional send-off in his home state before leaving for Washington to be sworn in as president tomorrow. It comes as the US records more than 400,000 coronavirus deaths. Correspondent Greg Jennett joins us now from Washington. Greg, g'day. You've been out on the streets for the last hour or so, but this video message has only just been released while you've been out and about, so you haven't seen it in detail. But what do you make of the overall tone of that?
Yes, it's interesting in its mode of departure, isn't it? From Donald Trump, after all of the turmoil, the tweets, and many would say the chaos of the last 4 years, he bows out in a rather subdued fashion. He did finally check a few boxes of regular decency. That is, he wished the next administration well, but he also recapped what he saw as his achievements. And you also heard there echoes, Joe, of his own inauguration speech almost exactly 4 years ago. And he's trying to cover off the fact that, in his view, there has been advancement on some of the markers he put down about Americans recovering their fate, their destiny, spurning political correctness and censorship. So he's really tracing over where he started, encapsulating the fact that, in his view, there were economic achievements before the pandemic, and then finally, right towards the end, mustering something in himself to acknowledge that it's over to the next team from here.
And has he still refused to acknowledge that Joe Biden legitimately won the election? Like, he's acknowledging that there will be a new administration, but is there this continuing undertone that the election was stolen from him?
Well, there's an absence of specific reference to the incoming president, and a big action that happens tomorrow, our time, that is by being absent from the very inauguration ceremony and breaking a very long tradition of handover there. The symbolism of that moment on Capitol Hill, where the outgoing president gestures towards the incoming, is powerful in and of itself, and Donald Trump has chosen, as a matter of record now, not to participate in that. So are we sensing right to the bitter end a begrudging tone in Donald Trump's transfer? I suppose you could say there are hints of that, definitely. But for Trump the person, even to get to the point where he had some form of acknowledgement in the tail end of that address is at least something, I suppose. And there was, we should also note here, Joe, there was a condemnation of violence as a way of achieving political change as well. That took a little while to come. It's not the first time he's gone there, but he did see fit to lob that into the final farewell message as well.
OK, Greg, now Joe Biden has touched down in Washington in a private plane. What lies ahead for him?
So he's going to attend a ceremony, a light-filled vigil on the National Mall tonight, Joe. That will be within the perimeter of steel fencing, so no members of the public there, but it will be to pay tribute to the now officially 400,000 plus Americans who've lost their lives in the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's his only public duty really left before he moves into Blair House, just adjacent to the White House, and he'll overnight there. But the big moment for Joe Biden was before he arrived here in Washington, D.C. It was to farewell the people of Delaware and his hometown of Wilmington, where he stood at the National Guard Reserve Centre, named in honour of his late son, Beau Biden, to really thank the people of Delaware for putting him into the Senate 49 years ago and keeping him in public life for all the period that remained, plus the 4 years ahead. Obviously, there was a big upswelling of emotion as he drew close to a very long chapter in the state of Delaware.
You know, it's kind of emotional for me. But look, you've been with me my whole career, and through the good times and the bad. And I want to thank you for everything. To my fellow Delawareans, on behalf of the entire Biden family that's here today, I want to express how much you mean to me and to every one of us. Excuse the emotion, but when I die, Delaware will be written on my heart.
And Greg, what can you tell us about Donald Trump's last remaining hours in office?
So he is expected to come forth with a round of pardons, perhaps numbering upwards towards 100, Joe. So we're awaiting those names. That'll come through the rapidly diminishing White House press office staff. Most have pretty much cleared out by now, but those pardons are expected. And then tomorrow morning, our time, there'll be the final appearance of Donald Trump and his wife Melania when they'll board Marine One, fly out to Joint Base Andrews here and board Air Force One for a flight to Florida. But otherwise, the video message really marked the final set piece, apart from the pardons and the last major sort of verbal pronouncements that do come from Donald Trump. Normally such a communicative figure, but once the social media platforms closed down on him so dramatically a little over a week ago, you just hear so much less of him now, Joe.
And Greg, what's happening in Congress to start preparing the Biden administration for office?
So the Senate sat back for the first time on the floor as a full entity since the Capitol was sieged, and in the back of everyone's minds was how are they going to advance the trial of Donald Trump in the Senate, and when are they going to do that? Well, they've just parked that. There's still no firm timeline for getting on with that trial. But what they are doing is addressing priority number one, which is hearing the confirmations of, or the nominations for confirmation of Joe Biden's cabinet picks. So that's well underway. People like Treasury nominee Janet Yellen was before the committee today answering their questions. But on that all-important question of impeachment and trial, there was an interesting contribution from the Republican former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He's going to lose that majority very, very shortly. But because they were reconvening for the first time since the Capitol was sieged, he made some pretty blunt comments that he hasn't made before about Donald Trump and the responsibility he should wear for those riotous events.
The mob was fed lies. They were provoked by the president and other powerful people. And they tried to use fear and violence to stop a specific proceeding of the first branch of the federal government, which they did not like. But we pressed on. We stood together and said an angry mob would not get veto power over the rule of law in our nation, not even for one night.
So you're sensing a bit of a shifting of the ground within the Republican Party, at least amongst its leadership. Mitch McConnell will go to a church service with Joe Biden, so it is a strong sense of out with the old, in with the new here. However, we shouldn't yet draw too many conclusions about conviction of Donald Trump, the soon-to-be former president, because Mitch McConnell and no other Republican in the Senate has yet declared which way they would vote on. That probably won't until the evidence is before them.
OK, Greg Jennett there on the streets of Washington. And the ABC will have comprehensive coverage of Joe Biden's inauguration. The actual inauguration doesn't happen until kind of 3:34-ish tomorrow morning. But our coverage on the news channel starts tonight with an episode of Planet America. So John Barron and Chaz Licciardello will preview the big day with special guests, including Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor, John Bolton. So that's John and Chaz tonight at 8:30 Eastern Daylight Time. Then tomorrow is the big day. So we'll start the day very, very early with a special edition of News Breakfast. So that News Breakfast will be on air from 3 a.m. tomorrow. That's Eastern Daylight Time. And as I mentioned, the ceremony itself will kind of start happening through that 3 o'clock hour into the 4 o'clock hour, Eastern Daylight Time. And then at 9 a.m. tomorrow, Eastern Daylight Time, there'll be an hour-long special with analysis hosted by Ellen Fanning and Stan Grant. And of course, I'll be here across the morning with the latest developments and reaction from 10 tomorrow morning. All Eastern Daylight Time. Now, ahead of Joe Biden's inauguration, the federal opposition leader is calling on the government to play a more assertive role in its alliance with the US. Anthony Albanese will today use a major foreign policy speech to accuse the Prime Minister of pandering to Donald Trump and call on the new Biden administration to focus more attention on Southeast Asia. Political reporter Steph Dalzell joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Steph, g'day. So what's the Labor leader calling for?
Well, Joe, Anthony Albanese wants the new administration to make more of an effort to strengthen US influence in the Southeast Asia region, and he'll make these comments in a speech today to the Perth US Asia Centre, where he'll say that the US needs to pick its battles with China, saying that both powers need to learn how to compete without drawing in other smaller countries. He's also expected to criticise Prime Minister Scott Morrison for his response to the storming of the US Capitol earlier this month. And Mr. Morrison did describe the riots as deeply distressing. However, he did not directly condemn or criticise the outgoing President Donald Trump for his part in inciting the crowds. And Anthony Albanese argues that Mr. Morrison needed to go further, saying that the reason why he didn't was because he was afraid of Trump supporters on his own government backbench. The Shadow Foreign Minister Penny Wong agrees that decision has affected Australia's relationship with the US. Take a listen to what she had to say.
Scott Morrison has corroded the alliance by the way in which he has approached his relationship with Donald Trump. He has put his political affinity with Mr. Trump and his own political interests ahead of Australia's interests and the values in the alliance. I mean, it was Scott Morrison who attended effectively a campaign rally for President Trump, and critically, it is Scott Morrison who has failed to call out Mr. Trump and defend democracy as other world leaders have.
Well, I don't accept the argument that I understand Anthony Albanese is trying to make, where he's implying that the Morrison government has put the US relationship at risk. The US-Australia relationship transcends politics in both countries, and Scott Morrison and his ministers will make any necessary pivot to the incoming administration.
Julie Bishop there. And Steph, to a different topic, the federal government's Home Builder program is likely to cost much more than first thought. Just what is the Home Builder program and what's led to this blowout?
Well, Joe, the Home Builder program was started in the peak of the pandemic to try to stimulate the housing and construction industries. Effectively, this amount has now blown out to $1.8 billion in how much it's expected to cost. Upwards of that, that's far exceeded the government's expectations. The latest figures show that 75,000 households have applied for this $25,000 grant under the Home Builder program up until December. Treasury was anticipating about 42,000 households would apply, so it's almost double that amount, and they were expecting that would cost about $920 million. Now, the Housing Minister Michael Sukkar says that's it's good. He's pleasantly surprised by that, and the government also says that this program is supporting $18 billion worth of residential construction projects. The scheme has been extended out until the end of March, although the amount of money that you can apply for has been slashed to $15,000. Labor has previously welcomed that extension. However, it has said that more needs to be done to stop the housing construction industry from shrinking.
Okay, Steph Dalzell in Canberra. So before we go on, I'll just mention a few live events we've got coming up this morning. So in about 10 minutes' time, US Vice President-elect Joe Biden will go to the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool for an event to mourn the deaths of 400,000 Americans in the COVID pandemic. That's ahead of his inauguration tomorrow. So that's a stunning shot there now of the National Mall and the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool there. So Joe Biden and Kamala Harris due to arrive there in about 10 minutes' time, and we're expecting comments from both of them at this ceremony as well. So, yeah, that's coming up in 10 minutes. And then another stunning shot there of the Washington Monument at the end of the reflecting pool. And you can just see the Capitol building in the background there as well. And at 10:45 this morning, Australian Eastern Daylight Time, we've got Anthony Albanese with that key foreign policy speech, and we'll be bringing you that here on the ABC News channel as well. The director of the Australian Tennis Open, Craig Tiley, has rebuked players for their public complaints about the hotel quarantine program. Reporter Elise Kinsella joins us now from Melbourne. Elise, so there have been these calls from Australian Open organisers for tennis players to keep their grievances off social media. What's led to this?
Yeah, there has been a call for players to change how they communicate. So since players arrived on Friday and Saturday in Melbourne, there have been a number of players who really have aired their grievances online, particularly on social media, complaining about everything from food to the conditions of rooms to difficulties training. And it hasn't gone down well in Melbourne. We have residents here who lived through a more than 100-day lockdown last year to get us to the position where we can host a major tournament like this, and it just hasn't gone down well. Now, one of the players who did do a fair bit of complaining online is Spanish player Roberto Batista Agut. He complained about his conditions. He compared hotel quarantine to being like in a prison. I think he's had a fair bit of feedback since those comments because they just didn't go down well in Melbourne. Last night, he's issued an apology. He said he was sorry to anyone who was offended and has thanked everyone who is putting on this Australian Open. So there does seem to have been a shift in tone in the last 24 hours or so from some players. On the women's side, the 13th ranked Victoria Azarenka has really stepped up to play a bit of a peacemaker. She's called on her fellow tennis players to understand what the local community here in Melbourne has been through and to really respect that. These are all comments I think that Craig Tiley, the director, will appreciate. He said he does understand the frustration of players. It's a very different preparation for a Grand Slam. And he did make the comment that there are plenty of players who appreciate everything that's being done for them. This is what he said a little earlier.
I think the majority of the players understand and accept it, and there's a minority that are struggling with it, but we're going to do whatever we can to make it better for them. And I do, these players have been traveling around the world and have been in isolation and quarantining, and it's been a very difficult experience for them, but they are going to be in a position when they do come out next week that they'll be able to compete in the next 4 weeks for $83 million in prize money and be in a country that's managed the virus better than anyone else in the world. So I think that's going to be the reward at the end, and we're looking forward to getting to that because some of these challenges we're experiencing now are not ones that we didn't expect, but they have been difficult, and obviously the commentary and the social media hasn't helped, but we have to just continue to move forward.
Annalise, are all players listening to that message?
It looks like most players are listening to that message. I think Craig Tiley's right when he's saying that the majority of players are appreciative of what's happening here for them, but not all players. And the context really is that the players have been split into two groups that have very different preparations. For most of the players, they have about 5 hours access to training courts each day to prepare for the Australian Open. But for the players who were on one of the 3 flights that have had a positive case, they are in what's being called a hard lockdown, where they aren't able to leave their rooms at all for 2 weeks. For those players, the anxieties seem to be higher. One of the players, Kazakh player player, Yulia Putincheva. She's been really critical on social media still. She's complained about having a mouse in her room, about a lack of fresh air because she doesn't have a balcony, and has even had a bit of a beef with former Australian player Renee Stubbs. So there still are tensions, Joe.
Yeah, I think if I had a mouse in my room, I'd be pretty unhappy about it. And how long do players have left in hotel quarantine, and what happens when they get out?
Yeah, so the players went into hotel quarantine on Friday and Saturday, so they're down to single digits in terms of their 14-day quarantine. For the players who are in a hard lockdown, we understand they'll have about 9 days between when they get out of their hotel and when the Australian Open starts. We know that there may be some changes to their preparation in terms of what lead-up games they play before the Open, and the organisers have said they are willing to look at the start of the Australian Open in terms of what they can do with scheduling matches to give those 72 players as much time as they can to prepare for the games, but the tournament will go ahead as planned.
Okay, Elise Kinsella there in Melbourne. And I'll just bring your attention to that shot down there in the corner of screen. That's the start of a ceremony that Joe Biden is attending to mourn the loss of